Give everyone a few moments to join the WebEx webinar. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Fountainhead, Rhode Island panel discussion on mental health and self-care. My name is DJ Kacheri, and I'm one of the board members at Fountainhead, and I'm pleased to be opening up our event tonight. Fountainhead, Rhode Island is a Rhode Island-based nonprofit organization with a mission to bring together diverse, motivated, and like-minded young professionals to advance crucial conversations and promote thought leadership and entrepreneurship in our communities. While our focus started in Rhode Island, we are thrilled to have expanded our influence across the country, with our current network recently surpassing 1,000 individuals. Throughout the year, we host networking events and panel discussions, which focus on a number of different topics, from financial literacy and technology to art and culture and sustainability. We pride ourselves on being able to bring industry experts to the table to discuss topics that are timely and affect the way we operate, both from a business and cultural perspective. You will also see our organization spotlight individuals and organizations that are doing amazing things in our community. We are happy to provide a platform to recognize those who go above and beyond, and proud to say we have shared over 40 spotlights in the last 3 years. For more information on Fountainhead or how you can get involved, please visit our website at www.fountainheadri.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and our Instagram at FountainheadRI. Our topic today could not be more timely. Mental health and self-care have recently become a major talking point stemming from the COVID pandemic and the drastic changes that we all have seen in our day-to-day lives. Despite this refocusing, mental health and self-care has long been a challenge. You see its impact, both positively and negatively, across all facets of society. Today, we are looking at what is mental health and self-care? How are the two related? Why are they important? What are the stigmas? And how are these conversations changing as we navigate through the pandemic? Certainly, there is more to cover on this topic than we have in just an hour, but we are very grateful to have a great cast of industry experts to facilitate our conversation. On the panel, we have Katie McDonald, a self-care strategist and keynote speaker at Be Nourished. Wayne Grover, the owner and founder of You Are Not Alone Gifts and the Yana Foundation. And Carolyn Mayu of Carolyn J. Mayu Consulting. Moderating our discussion is Janella Watson. She is the principal and founder of Janella Watson Consulting and STEM in the making. In addition to moderating, Janella will also be coordinating a Q&A period at the end of the night. Your comments and questions are strongly encouraged, and we ask that you pass them along to Janella and the panelists directly via the Zoom platform. Lastly, before passing it along to our moderator, I want to give special thanks to our sponsor tonight, Cross Country Mortgage. One of the major benefits of our organization is that most of our events and content are free of charge. We wouldn't be able to do this without some amazing partners, and Cross Country Mortgage is one of them. Thank you. And with that, I hope everyone enjoys our discussion. Janella, take it away.
Thank you so much, DJ, and thank you to the team at Fountainhead who have really brought an extraordinary event together this afternoon, this evening. Welcome to everyone who is joining us. We invite you into the chat to introduce yourselves, to get to know one another, and to direct any questions that you have to us as the conversation gets started. I would love to take a moment to invite my my fellow panelists into the conversation. While I'm eager to dive straight into what is mental health and really get this conversation started, I would love if you shared a moment about your work and one act of self-care that you have found that feels resonant and meaningful in the moment that we are in. Caroline, would you mind kicking us off?
This is Caroline. I am game to kick us off. My name is Caroline, as Janella said. I have short choppy brown hair. I'm wearing retro glasses with a blue rim. I'm a Caucasian American, and I'm wearing a white short sleeve shirt. A big part of my work is related to mental health and the disability community. And for anyone who either is not joining us by screen or happens to have a visual impairment, that is a common way to introduce yourself in many of the communities that I work with and that I identify with. So I have worked in nonprofits, I have worked in corporations, I've consulted for nonprofits, I've consulted for corporates, and a big part of my work right now is the intersection of making work for all, meaning what does flex work look like? How do we design offices in this emerging COVID world? And there's a lot of like, what does back to work look like? And there's a huge gap between what many employers think about making it to the way it was before, and employees who are saying there are some things we don't ever want to go back to because that never worked for us. That commute, those benefits, that was not good for our mental health. That was not good for our well-being. So I think of myself as being a bit of a mediator in between employees and employers to, at the end of the day, encourage open, honest, tension for the greater good type of conversations to really make mental health and well-being a center point and not a taboo topic, especially in corporate entities.
And one form of self-care that you've been practicing?
Thank you for that. I got a dog. I accidentally am one of the millions of Americans who now has a COVID puppy. My COVID puppy is now 1 year and 2 months. I vowed I would never own a house and never own a dog, and that dog ensures that I get outside multiple times a day to walk, to be in nature, to put a screen down, and I would not do it on my own, could not do it on my own. So I pay the vet bills to force myself to do it with the dog because I am so darn bad at it on my own.
Thank you, Caroline. Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie McDonald. I'm CEO and founder of Be Nourished, and I'm a self-care strategist. I work with high achievers who are taking care of business and have forgotten to take care of themselves in the process. And I also, self-care is how I roll, what I do, my jam, so to speak. And yet it's just as challenging for me as it is for all of us when we have to feel like we're choosing self-care over productivity. So it's a false choice, but I wanted to just say it's real. The struggle is real for all of us. But my favorite ritual is having a cup of tea. It forces me to slow down and it awakens all my senses, and it is a meditative practice and really allowing me to recalibrate no matter what time of day it is for me to go quiet and go inward.
I can appreciate that and attest to it being a profound ritual that's taken me through COVID too. Wayne, if you're with us here, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about your own, a glimpse into your own self-care practice?
Sure. And my apologies for the video not working, but I'm happy that I've been able to dial in. So my name is Wayne Grover. I am the founder of You Are Not Alone Gifts and the Yana Foundation. And just very simply, I created this company with the mission of eliminating loneliness. And we are just simply trying to inspire others to reach out to others, let them know you care about them, and share those 4 words, you are not alone. And then along with that, we created these really stylish gifts that help deliver that very sincere, very warm message that you care about someone and you're there for him or her. That's the short story. And prior to that, I worked on, I'm a reformed hedge fund partner and Wall Street guy. And one of the reasons why I founded Yana, I am not a mental health expert, but I have been diagnosed with depression, and I have myself felt the depths of loneliness throughout my life. And one of the driving factors in the creation of You Are Not Alone Gifts was that I didn't want anyone else to feel the loneliness that I felt, and I thought that there is a relatively simple solution, and it just takes one other person to recognize that someone may be going through a hard or a difficult or a lonely time. And you don't have to say much, you just have to share those 4 words. And in terms of self-care, especially through the pandemic, there are 2 things that I've been doing, and it helps me a great deal. And obviously, everything is different for everyone. But number 1 is I force myself to do a video or a telephone call and share what I'm feeling. Right? I practice vulnerability. Because I find that if I don't do that and keep bottling things up, then the loneliness really compounds itself. And then the second thing is I get outside and exercise. So those are my 2 self-care habits.
I'm following in great footsteps here, both in terms of the esteem of the panelists, but also these wonderful ideas for self-care that we're beginning to share. So I am Janella Watson, and I work by day and by night as a children's media and education consultant, supporting some great children's media companies like Nickelodeon and Sesame Street, helping them build appropriate, developmentally appropriate, age appropriate, and culturally responsive curriculum for children's shows. And locally, I practice a lot of self-care in dance classes, especially at AS220 and House of Glitter. Finding more ways to move during the pandemic has been my way of coping. Even if it's taking just a moment of movement snack between Zoom calls, trying to get in, throw on some Stevie Wonder or whatever it takes to really get myself moving again. Thank you, everyone, for taking a moment to share a glimpse into your professional practice. And I would love to just really get us going in conversation about what is mental health. What do you consider mental health, and how does that understanding kind of manifest itself in your work? I'm looking for those eager eyes of who would love to chime in first. And I'm thinking that it's Katie's smile that is telling me she's ready.
Oh, I'm so not a poker face. So really, what is mental health? Well, I mean, self-care strategies are in place to protect and insulate the mental health. I have no deep depression. I have no anxiety. I don't teach from an ivory tower with some concept about mental health. I became a self-care strategist because I had to step into the responsibility of taking care of myself so that I could insulate myself from more mental health challenges. I mean, it is astounding to me that we often deny and neglect our own mental health, our states of mind, as if it's not as valuable as any other body organ or any other body functioning, as there's a source of shame, and we need to bring it into the light. So mental health is a state of well-being, and that requires self-care. It requires attention and intention. And those are things that we often bypass in, the pursuit of busyness. But in fact, what this night is about recalibrating, taking a moment and recommitting to the urgency of our own mental health and well-being, so that the way in which we serve the world, the way in which we show up, is one of bounty and abundance and groundedness, instead of reactivity, resentment, rage, and victimhood, all these things that are obstacles to our mental well-being.
Caroline.
I'm happy to dive in next.
Mm-hmm.
So to build on what Katie said, so I agree with all of that. I think of it in a very simplistic way of the health of our minds. There is a certain intuition that comes with, even if we're not great at it, our bodies need food. We kind of sort of know our bodies need exercise, even if we don't do it every day. But there tends to be a lack of intuition that our minds need that same degree of health. And I'll share, this is a true story from my life a few years ago when I was a consultant and doing the 100-hour work weeks and thinking I was so glam and on the road 80% of the time. I said very matter-of-factly to one of my coworkers, I said, I think I may have asthma or allergies because I'm having a hard time breathing. And she went white and she looked at me and she said, what you just described sounds like a panic attack to me. And I know that because I have them. And that is when I realized that it is not, they are not separate. My lack of care at that time for my mental health was negatively impacting my physical health, which is how I have come to realize that both need fuel and care, and they are not necessarily separate when it comes to being healthy.
And I'm not sure if I have much more to add to how beautifully Katie and Caroline went through that. But yeah, in terms of mental health, yeah, it's a state of well-being. But I'd like to just point out one thing that Katie mentioned, and she mentioned kind of neglecting and pushing aside and feeling shame about mental health or unhealth. And the only thing I would just add is that, everyone has to be very mindful of how they're feeling and acknowledge that and then decide, the proper course of how do you take care of it or how you feed it, as Caroline was just saying. So I just think an important aspect is that, at least I know for me, I neglected it a great deal and felt great shame. And, for the longest time, I was working in the field of finance and investments where that was just not allowed, mental health and emotion and those sorts of things. So I just think that's an important aspect, that you really have to focus on being mindful of how you're really feeling and then setting a course to tackle that and help treat it.
I appreciate that sentiment so much, Wayne, and recognize that it's not only the kind of rat race of the corporate world that brings about these, these feelings of shame when we indulge in self-care, but that it's truly, our mental health and well-being goes part and parcel with our productivity, with our satisfaction, with our ability to find and name gratitude, and is really dynamically impactful, as Caroline was saying, on kind of every facet of our holistic, being. The pieces of the ways that you've described some of the sensations that go along, right, with anxiety and with stress, and some of the signals that our bodies are trying to give us in the midst of, either poor mental health or kind of just the need to kickstart or reinvigorate practices that lend to, improved mental health state. It's fascinating that really it can touch each of us in every facet of, of our lives, and is not necessarily just attached to the corporate world. I know I've experienced it in the not-for-profit world in really profound ways as well, where the sacrifices that you are making and the and sometimes we are working in environments that help us as teams develop greater attention to and practices around self-care and mental health. And sometimes we are not in environments that foster that kind of practice at all. I hope that we can talk a little bit about those pieces of, why do you think we are so afraid to talk about mental health? Where do you think that kind of stigma comes from?
Well, I believe we have a culture of comparisonitis, right? We're looking at everybody else's lives and we're thinking they've got it all together. Like they belong to the I have it all together club and we'll never get in, right? We're just banging, let us in, let us in. Like, what does it take? You know, what do I have to do to gain entrance into this club that doesn't exist at all? We compare our messy insides to everybody else's perfectly packaged outsides and wonder why we feel so inadequate. So people aren't, you know, the shame comes from not talking about it. The shame comes from believing that we're supposed to have it all together, that, you know, we're heavily invested in how we're perceived. And in order to be successful, we tell ourselves that we actually need to be human doings and not human beings. And that's what we really need to dismantle, that our mental health, it's a daily habit. It requires daily maintenance. It's a very fragile, I mean, incredibly strong, but fragile plant that needs watering and sunshine and tending. And it needs to be brought out in events like this where we're talking about it. And here, you know, out of all of it, 3 of us, you know, have said we've struggled with mental health challenges, that we ourselves, no matter how accomplished we are, you know, we've bumped up against it. And it's actually been a catalyst for transformation in my life. And it helps me to like wake up and remember, oh, wow, I've circled the drain before. I'm not willing to do it. I'm not willing to do it again. So I have to do the self-care strategies on a daily basis because I don't want to get to where I was before, but it requires daily attention. And that's the gift of it. So we have to remove the stigma and embrace the gift.
Yeah, and I think Katie's spot on in that. And you know, I can't address, you know, why are so many afraid to talk about it. I can only address why I was so afraid to talk about it for so long and deal with it. And Katie hit the nail on the head. You know, it's perception. I was so worried about what other people would think of me if I talked about mental health and how I was feeling and what was going on inside me and my brain. And you know, and I was worried that I was going to perceive as flawed, weak, or even potentially that weakness, which is not a weakness, but that's how I viewed it. But it could be used against me. So that's why I was so afraid to deal with it and talk about it for so long. But here's just a brief little anecdote. At one point in time, near the end of my investment career or hedge fund career, I went around the country and talked to all of our clients. And these are, you know, the most recognized entrepreneurs, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, you know, top investment professionals, along with friends, you know, in everyday walk of life. And as soon as I started sharing, you know, what I was going through, how I was feeling, and also how I was trying to correct it and deal with it, and literally every single person then opened up and shared their story of either how they feel alone or their own mental health or dealing with a family member that they could never discuss with other people, et cetera. So just by talking about it, it seemed to give others permission to talk about it with you as well. And it was an amazing experience, enhanced relationships, greater connection. And it was just a wonderful feeling. So I thought I would just share that a little bit.
That's wonderful to hear, Wayne. And, you know, it resonates that you kind of had to be brave, you know, and take a risk in terms of bringing up the subject and talking with people in your environment and to even be received in conversation. You know, David has posed a good question here in the Q&A about how to go about getting the conversation started about mental health in an environment where it's not okay to talk about, either as part of the culture or the fabric of a work environment, or it even makes me think of some communities where there is kind of actually a disproportionate level of stigma shared in community about seeking help or even voicing that you need help in attending to mental health issues. What what are some of the ways that you can reach for resources and get those conversations started?
This is Caroline. I'm happy to chime in there. So in this one, I tip my hat to Wayne on this one. To me, number one is if you have one person in your life, that could be a therapist, that could be a parent, that could be a friend, that could be your barber. If you have one person in your life that you are being honest with, open with, you have done something with, I remember this from a philosophy class I took when I studied abroad. You take off the veil of ignorance. So when you are wearing the veil, you're not talking about it, so you assume everyone. And the second you lift that up, you build this connection, and that is a relief. That is an outlet. That's also not easy to do, but one person can make a huge difference. A practical tip that I coach in from the standpoint of the workplace is it is absolutely true that mental health is stigmatized. It is absolutely true that tons of startups and small nonprofits don't have the infrastructure of human resources. If you are 15 people or less, you are not protected by the American with Disabilities Act. I mean, like all of these are real things that are terrifying, and people lose their jobs every day. That said, a way to think about it is I'm having a hard time concentrating in the open office space. Would love to work together to come up with some ideas to increase productivity. So if you can argue for what you need and frame it in terms of this is going to make me a more productive, more engaged employee. And we typically know what that is. Maybe that's, I would really love to start my workday at 7, or I really need to start my workday at 11 after I get my kids to school. So being in a place where you feel like you have the psychological safety to ask for the specific things that will create give in your life instead of just constantly creating that tension, to me, that can be a really great starting place to start to advocate for your mental health and well-being needs without necessarily disclosing per se.
It brings to mind. Please go ahead, Wayne.
Sorry, Janella. I just wanted to, maybe just even reiterate what Caroline was saying. It is, a lot of people working for small businesses, and there aren't the resources there. But even walking up to your boss, your manager, even a coworker, and even broaching the subject about mental health and framing it as, if we could have a happier workplace, if we could have happier workers, greater team cohesion, greater job satisfaction, which then, as you had kept on mentioning, Janella, is greater productivity. I think that's a really innocent and simple way as well to broach the subject, especially if someone is completely uncomfortable talking about themselves. But I think that's just another way to approach it, especially in a smaller organization. And obviously, if it's a larger organization, you can go to HR and others to start talking about that.
Thank you, Wayne, for that. And when I think about this in the context of family and community, not necessarily just distinctly to the context of the workplace, some of us have grown up in households where, emotions were dirty words, and the expression of, either the expression of anxiety or stress or distress was positioned, as Wayne was saying, as weakness, as opposed to the vulnerability that it is. There's nothing weak about being vulnerable. Thinking about community resources that are openly available, we know that through the pandemic, especially telehealth and therapy sessions through, through video call has become a much more ubiquitous practice and has really opened the door to access for those who, who have health insurance, and even some of those barriers to accessing mental health care through the pandemic have been lifted by reducing copays and kind of the other aspects of seeking therapy, working groups. They're also wonderful throughout Rhode Island and beyond. There are wonderful community-based organizations that I know I have turned to when my husband, couldn't take one more moment of all that I had on my mind and my heart. So, I, for myself, have recently taken a mindfulness class through the Center for Resilience at Brown University. There are wonderful offerings through the Swearer Center. And I know that this wonderful group of panelists will be sharing additional resources that will come part and parcel with this webinar recording. But thinking broadly about the resources in your backyard, and taking taking advantage, honestly, of some of the smaller bright lights that have come from COVID in terms of at least reducing some of those barriers to mental health care has been valuable. Speaking of, and since I broached the subject, we all know that mental health was important to talk about and an essential issue for us to address before the pandemic. And we know that COVID has not only shined a brighter light on this topic, but it has also dynamically impacted our collective experience of mental health and self-care. I would love to talk a little bit about what you know from your practice or from your work. If you want to share a little bit about how you have seen our experiences of the past year and a half either shift or change the conversation that we are having about mental health. What are those nuanced changes that you've seen, or really like hit you over the head kind of changes that we've all seen in terms of the landscape of mental health?
This is the $1 million question. This is Caroline. If there's one resource I can recommend on this from someone who has said it way better than I ever could, there is a TED Talk that has recently gone viral from Jodi Ann Burry, which is the myth of bringing your full authentic self to work. Many of us mask every day at work. Maybe we are masking that we are going through a divorce. Maybe we are masking that we are in a lot of pain. Maybe we are masking that we're on the autism spectrum disorder and we really need to force ourselves to make eye contact with people. Maybe we are just adopting cultural cues that are not ours because that is mainstream typically white workplaces, white leadership. And she does a really good job making the connection between how much energy goes into masking versus actually doing the work. And to me, a benefit that has happened with COVID is, and I will never say it's a silver lining because this is for me and for the universe, been an extraordinarily traumatic time. So like, I am definitely not at that. Like I am not even beginning to process how hard this has been, but we've seen into people's homes. We've normalized what it looks like to dress down, to not have our hair cut, to have our kids shouting in the background, and just given ourselves grace and given our coworkers grace and just like reminded ourselves that we're all human. It just feels like we've gotten into this pattern of whether you are talking on the phone with a client and you're an entrepreneur, like you get into work mode. And like I've even, put on lip gloss for phone calls during COVID, like just to like get myself in the zone. And maybe that's a good thing for a pump up, and maybe that's absolutely ridiculous. But this idea of taking off the mask and working towards a self where we are fluidly ourselves in our physical appearance and how we talk about our personal life across all aspects of our life, that to me is, to quote Katie, a big way to move from being human doings to human beings, and maybe even recognizing and appreciating that we will be better coworkers and collaborators because we have established ourselves vis-a-vis as human beings and not human doings. And that is something I don't ever want to see go away as it relates to how we introduce ourselves in professional settings and advocate for what we need to be whole where we live and where we work.
I love the concept of masks. That's really powerful. And I think just the vigilance that it takes to perform day in and day out is one of our biggest energy vampires. But from a COVID standpoint, I really think that it just pulled the curtain back on what was already there. I think we have this collective delusion that we have way more control than we do. And the fact is, there's very little in our lives that we can control, except for what we eat, what we think, what we say, what we do. The rest of it, like, despite our best perfectionistic approaches and attempts, it's not going to happen. We can't control anything else. And I think the pandemic revealed that. And it also revealed the forced calm, or maybe not the forced calm, but certainly the forced quiet. We were forced to go inward. We couldn't go outside, so we went inside. And what we discovered when we turned our glance to ourselves is the anxiety that I think was already there. I think the depression was already there. And I think we were trying to hide it through busyness. And that's what I see over and over again. So there are a lot of people that have reacted to COVID in numbing, right? They're binging on alcohol, on food, on screen time. They're shutting it down. It's too much, right? And we're shutting it down because it's all too real. It's just served on a platter, and we weren't ready for it. And then there are others that are maybe equally, have explored that, but they're awakening. It's really an opportunity for transformation, not perfection, not not pure enlightenment, but I've often just said, like, what is it going to take? Like a pandemic to get us to wake up to the responsibility of our own needs? Like, yeah, well, okay, we got that. Like, we don't have to get sick. We don't have to be burned out. We don't have to circle the drain in order to wake up. Let us wake up now and let us say, my needs are legitimate. And I may need to be the pioneer. I may need to be the voice that liberates everybody else. I'm the one that's willing to take the risk to express my needs, to advocate for them, and to treat myself with the same dignity and respect that I treat everybody else that I happen to encounter.
I really appreciate that sentiment quite a bit, Katie. I think that there is, when I think about work-life balance, or what we used to call work-life balance, it's really been turned extraordinarily on its head, through the course of the past year and a half, working from my sun porch or from, from the couch, has dynamically changed the kind of boundaries that I had naturally created by driving into work each day. And Wayne, I know that your work centers on this quite a bit, but I was amazed by my own sense of isolation and loneliness, especially through our true stay-at-home experience. And it helped crystallize and bring to light the ways that we depend on a rich network of people around us in order to really feel connected to each other. It's been wild to even through this conversation, try to look each of you in the eye and know that I'll never through Zoom be able to do so, right? But still leaning on this, in the midst of the pandemic for myself, one of my greatest senses of connection has come through a Sunday afternoon call with my grandmother, all of her great grandchildren, and kind of a roaming cast of cousins. And Wayne, it makes me think of kind of the notions that you share about reaching and connecting even when we cannot physically be together, whether that be, the people that we love and who nourish our spirit, or the people who we collaborate and work with hand in hand.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. And sometimes even chatting with a stranger, which has been very difficult during the past year and a half. But the isolation definitely has brought to the forefront feelings of loneliness. And as I mentioned, I'm not an expert, but it takes a little courage, but you have to reach out, right? Make that phone call or video call, and talk to somebody. But and it's also the other side too, is getting people just to be more empathetic and understanding and wondering or empathizing with another in terms of they may be feeling this way and I want to do something about it, or how can I help them, or have a conversation with them. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Please go ahead, Caroline.
I'll pause. It's a thought, but since I forget what the question was, I will refrain from adding on and hope it loops back in a moment.
Well, because of the richness of the conversation, I don't want to lose track or tack on some of the tenets of self-care that either we ourselves are practicing, that we are bringing to to our workplaces. And I would love for us to spend a moment sharing kind of what has been rising to the top in terms of adopting a practice of self-care. Katie, I know in your work you say that the path to health and well-being is different for each individual, and that we all need a different collection of things to nourish us. I wonder if in your practice there are any things that you have noticed rising to the top that some of your clients share in terms of what they're finding along this path to self-care and better health.
So self-care is about self-awareness. It's right. We've got to slow our roll enough and be curious about our own lives and our own needs. Pivot the attention away from the external world and again, turn inward and be as curious about ourselves as we are about strangers on social media. The fact is we're just not investing in the relationship we have with them ourselves. And that's what self-care is about. So that tea ritual that I shared, but back to that sense of control and mastery. If every day you woke up and said, these are the 3 things that I want to accomplish today. Like I use self-care as a tool for getting things done, right? We don't have to come undone to get things done. So they're not in competition. We don't, we can still be highly productive and also deeply nourished by our habits. So identifying 3 things that you're going to accomplish and then celebrating the heck out of it, committing to doing it, holding it as a contract, honoring that commitment in the way that you would to any other promise you made to anybody else, but actually doing it for yourself. And the other thing I would add, and my list of a toolkit is massive when it comes to self-care strategies, but you have to understand, what are your needs? Like, what do I need? Asking yourself that question every day and then slowing down enough to wait for the answer, because the answer will come. And that's how we repair the relationship we have with ourselves. And that's what self-care is. I would also encourage you to think about, a lot of times we need to, listen less to ourselves and talk to ourselves more. And what I mean by that is the things that we say to ourselves is just often just total BS. They're old stories, they're somebody else's stories. It's just crap. And we've got to stop listening to that and instead talk to ourselves, parent ourselves into a different state of mind. You could kick and scream and say, I don't want to meditate, or I don't want to have any quiet time. I don't want to journal. And it's like, it's not a matter of whether you're in the mood. It's a matter of, are you deeply committed to your own well-being? And the higher self makes that decision, and the daily self is the one that implements it. That's self-care, doing what you said you were going to do when you don't want to do it because you know it's in service to your higher self. And the fact is, self-care is essential and self-neglect is selfish. We got to turn it on its head. It is selfish to bring a compromised version of yourself into this world that so desperately needs you. It is selfish to be underperforming for yourself and overfunctioning for everybody else.
This is Caroline. Thank you, Katie. As someone who is terrible, I'm still like, I know it, and I disagree with none of this. And I'm here to say that this is still real darn hard. And it not intuitive. I'm uncomfortable listening to Katie because I know she's right. And the version of it I tell myself, since I am not motivated and wired to put myself first, is something I learned on the airlines, which is when your oxygen mask comes down, you need to put it on yourself before you can help someone else. And I said, if it's good enough for Southwest, it's good enough for me. And the story I tell myself, and this one, I can get behind this. I have 2 stepkids. They are 12 and 15. I would never want them to model some of the things that I have done to myself. So when I think about what it means to, I have power and privilege, and I want to use my power and my privilege to break that cycle. I want to showing employees who are younger than me that you should take boundaries. You should maximize all of your vacation time. It is totally okay to go to doctor's offices and not feel guilty. And that said, and this is specific to my world, which is largely a corporate world, you can hear that from HR. You can read that on a website all day. If your leaders are not doing it, if your parents are not doing it, if your friends are not doing it, you are not going to do it. So for me, I'm perfectly okay. I'm naturally wired to work myself to poor health, but I can say I would never want my kids to treat their bodies the way that I am wired to do. And that for me is something that I can go to tap into, to say, this is why I have to put on my oxygen mask first.
That resonates so strongly, Caroline, and it makes me think of 2 things. I'm an anxious mom who, surprise, has an anxious 8-year-old. And he has taught me so much about developing coping strategies and being able to pick and choose what he's going to practice in his moments of heightened anxiety. When he starts to feel his breath get out of control or his shoulders tighten, like there's a whole set of sensations that he goes through, he will say out loud what he's going to practice, right? I'm just going to take a quick walk and take some deep breaths, or I'm just going to go out here and kind of, twirl around in the grass for a moment. But more than that, the modeling, Caroline, that you were speaking of, also means like becoming good role models to ourselves. I have been very practiced in negative self-talk. I'm my worst critic, and very, very, I've been very harsh, and have been practicing lately, really as part of a mindfulness practice, thanking my mind for the thought and then releasing it, not having to accept it as kind of part of my story, but instead treat it as kind of a side effect, a byproduct, right, of my mind, and its work to find calm, and practicing that with my family, starting, Katie, as you were saying about setting intentions at the beginning of the day. We have chosen as a family to start a gratitude practice. And so we're either talking about what are we grateful for and centering our minds on that, or we're doing a little bit of, where will we find the lovely in this day? Where will we be looking for it? And trying to frame our, the focus of our day in finding the bright spots, as opposed to the darker spots that we could walk toward.
Well,
Please
I
go
love
ahead.
that practice because our brain likes to be busy and we need to give it a job. And if we don't, it will swirl and twirl into very destructive habits for a lot of us. So we need to interrupt that pattern. We need to intervene. And one of the ways to do it is to give it a different job. So if you're telling yourself, I'm going to, at the end of the day, record the 3 things for which I'm most grateful, our brain is now looking for those. Right? Or I'm going to highlight and capture the 3 acts of beauty or kindness that I encountered. And it's like, all of a sudden, our brain is like, okay, I'm here for duty. And that's where it's putting its attention. So we want to give it a job so that it nourishes us. And I really love that you've adopted that practice in your home. Smart. And by the way, it's actually directly connected to our joy. Our capacity for joy is directly linked to our ability to express gratitude. I mean, scientifically proven, not just fluff.
Very much appreciate that, Katie. And someone has posed a question to you, Katie. How can having an accountability partner help in starting a self-care routine, or keeping it going? And why do you think having an accountability partner is so valuable?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really personal decision. Some people, it's not going to be the right thing, but for a lot of us, we really will show up for somebody else. We're going to do it. So that if we now have an accountability partner, we're going to disappoint ourselves all day long until we learn not to, but we're not going to disappoint somebody else. And that becomes that kind of mask in public facing. We don't want to be a failure. We also don't want to let somebody else down. We tell ourselves we'll rise, right? We tie that superhero cape on and it's like, okay, I'm going to be there for her or him. Well, that's easy. We love flying around that way. But at some point it starts to choke us because we're not actually rescuing ourselves. And so leveraging the accountability partner is a tool and a practice for making sure that you're showing up for yourself, even if you have to justify it by showing up for somebody else. Yeah.
And even if there's not even if you're not taking on an accountability partner per se, I've leaned on my Fitbit, or keeping track of things, and in a journal, in order to kind of kickstart that routine creation for myself. And it may be, an accessible and small step that someone can take in order to find what they need in order to build that kind of the muscle around practicing self-care consistently.
Right. It's the consistency is the muscle you're talking about. And the smaller you can make whatever that task is, and then do it consistently and then celebrate the heck out of your accomplishment, that's the recipe for success. So it really, our ultimate goal is to be accountable to ourselves. And until we have that muscle, and we all need help, I'm not saying like we all need help in being held accountable to what we say we're going to do, but start small and understand, gain the confidence to say, oh, I said I was going to do this, I'm doing it, I can do anything now, right? And just slowly but surely we build.
I also think accountability partners are great. And I'm owning this as an I statement for me, because sometimes they're cheerleaders and sometimes they're like, I call bullshit. There's really and sometimes we need to hear that. And something I believe or have experienced is that we as humans are incredibly wily and we tend to talk to people when we want the reflective answer we're looking for. So we tend to go to different friends for different things because we are wired to go to the person who will validate our feelings and our lived experience. So one thing that I really like about the idea of an accountability buddy or person is to sometimes think about looking outside of the intuitive person of who you would normally go to, because that is an easier relationship to get the harder answer back versus like, I know there was so much going on, I know you're so busy, I know you're so tired. And for me, sometimes that tough love, that like unexpected gem that I didn't see coming, really is the accountability I need to really remove myself from my own echo chamber of joy, celebration, self-doubt, excuses, whatever the flavor is in the moment for me at that point in time.
Just taking a moment to elevate Ashley's comment in the chat about modeling transparency and vulnerability as leaders within our workplaces and in our communities. I know that we spoke about that collectively, but really shouting out the mantra of her workplace, New Urban Arts, as we take care of ourselves, we take care of each other, and we take care of the studio, or our space, our community. I think that those really resonate as concentric circles in creating healthy beings and healthy connections and healthy communities. And it begins with ourselves at the center of those concentric circles. So Wayne, someone has posed a question and has said, first expressing an appreciation for your openness and sharing your story, wondering how does someone become more comfortable in sharing their own struggles, and why is it important? Does it help to heal, to bring your story and share your story?
Well, thank you for that. And there's no simple answer. It's hard to be vulnerable. And again, I reflect upon my life, my experiences, because that's what I know. Right? Everyone is different. But you had mentioned it earlier. I think it was you, Janella. I grew up in a household where emotion wasn't welcome, and it wasn't fostered. There was a complete lack of communication, and and then competing in sports and working on Wall Street and everything else that I did in my life, that worked for a while. Not being vulnerable and holding in emotions, but it eventually comes back in some form to bite you in the ass. And and I'll just, for me, I ended up going through a divorce because I wasn't practicing vulnerability. So, it seems like common sense right now, but, back then, I just wasn't sharing at all. And so no wonder, that happened. So there's no really easy way. For me, I learned how to be vulnerable because I was fortunate enough that I found a great therapist, and we did a lot of hard work to begin on that. But it's also surrounding yourself with the right type of people. If you're fortunate to have those friends who encourage vulnerability and slowly help you bring it out, and also aren't critical of you when you're trying to practice vulnerability. But the one thing that I can say is your life will be so much more enriched, healthy. You'll have so many greater connections and greater relationships in life and in the workplace too, by practicing vulnerability, right? By being human, by being authentic. People appreciate that and love that, and they gravitate towards that. So it's scary in the beginning. And again, for me, I was so afraid of what other people were going to think of me. but you know, you learn how to get past that, and the reactions that you get then reinforce that behavior. Not all the time, but most of the time.
I
But it's
appreciate
well
that.
worth it's well worth the risk.
I was going to say, in our household, we call that, the healthiest risk taking, right? It's
Yeah.
really about, it's about being brave in sparking those conversations, and also knowing that you have us, the panelists here, the wonderful resources that we will share post conversation, and and community to reach out to along your own self-care journey. I just want to take a moment before we invite DJ back to wrap up, to extend my thanks and appreciation to the panelists today. It's been such a rich and worthwhile conversation to be a part of. And thank you once again to Fountainhead, Rhode Island, for supporting this conversation and bringing it to community.
That's
And thank you,
wonderful,
Janella.
And on behalf of Fountainhead, we thank all of you. Katie, Carolyn, Wayne, Janella, you guys are excellent. Such a wonderful conversation. And just looking at the questions and the chat box, thank you all for the participation. Really seemed to open some people up, and hopefully we can pass along some additional resources to keep the conversation going, because it doesn't end here, obviously. So thank you all. I'd like to thank our sponsor again, Cross Country Mortgage. Please follow us, Fountainhead, Rhode Island. We're looking to have additional events, networking events, and different programs for the rest of this year. Again, thank you all for participating. Thank you for our panelists, and stay safe, everyone. All the best.